I paid off my mother's medical debt, $247,000 across 18 months, and bought her a house she could finally call her own. I did it quietly without telling anyone. When I drove out to surprise her on the 1-year anniversary of her remission, my brother's car was in the driveway, and there was a lockbox on the front door that I had never installed. My name is Nadia. I'm 32. I work in healthcare billing compliance, which means I spend my days reading insurance contracts the way other people read restaurant menus, looking for the clause buried in the middle that changes everything. I know what an assignment of benefits form actually does. I know the difference between a lien and a judgment. I know which signatures can be undone and which ones are permanent. I didn't come to this work by accident. My mother was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 2 days after my 29th birthday. She called me from the parking lot of her OB/GYN because she didn't want to cry inside the building. She kept apologizing for interrupting my workday. That was who she was, always shrinking, always managing other people's comfort before her own. She'd raised me and my brother on a teacher's salary after my father left when I was 11. She kept the lights on. She went to every school play. She packed lunches until I was old enough to feel embarrassed about it, and then she stopped without being asked, without making me say it out loud. She understood things before you had to explain them. My brother is 4 years older than me. He'd moved 3 states away for a sales job about a year before the diagnosis and had been back exactly twice in the intervening years, once for Thanksgiving, once when his truck needed work and he needed a free place to stay. I am not being unkind. I am being accurate. When the diagnosis came, I was the one who went with her to the oncologist. I was the one who sat in the waiting room during the first surgery, the second surgery, and the 2 rounds of chemotherapy that followed. I took unpaid leave from my job for 6 weeks. I slept on an air mattress in her living room for most of that time because she lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor with no elevator, and after the second surgery, the stairs were a problem we had to solve differently every day. I learned to do her laundry on a schedule that matched her energy levels. I learned which soups she could keep down and which ones came back up. I learned not to talk during the first 45 minutes after treatment because that was the window when she needed quiet and she would never ask for it herself. My brother sent money twice, $100 the first time, $200 the second. He texted her every Sunday. She always texted back that she was doing great. The insurance situation was complicated is too soft a word. Her policy had gaps I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't read the paperwork myself. Out-of-network anesthesiology during an in-network surgery. A drug that was covered for one diagnosis code but not another despite being prescribed for the same condition. Appeals that I filed and refiled and argued over the phone for hours, sometimes winning, usually not. The bills accumulated in a folder I kept in a 3-ring binder that I brought to every appointment. By the time she was declared in remission, the folder was 3 inches thick and the outstanding balance was $247,000. I put it on a payment plan and then I started paying it down. I worked extra contracts. I took on freelance compliance consulting on weekends. I did not take a vacation for 2 years. I did not buy a new car when mine needed a transmission. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. Not my coworkers, not my friends, and especially not my brother. Because I wasn't doing it to be acknowledged. I was doing it because it needed to be done, and I was the one who could do it. While I was paying off the debt, I started thinking about the apartment. The 3rd floor walk-up with no elevator and the neighbor above who played bass-heavy music until 2 in the morning, and the radiator that clanged all winter and the parking lot that flooded when it rained hard. My mother had lived there for 11 years. She kept it immaculate. She'd hung curtains, she'd sewn herself and arranged her books alphabetically and put a small pot of herbs on the kitchen windowsill that she talked to sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening. She had made it home through sheer insistence. But it was not a good building. It was not a safe building. And after everything her body had been through, she deserved a home that didn't fight her. I started looking at houses in her same school district. She still knew families there. Still ran into former students at the grocery store, still belonged to that neighborhood in ways that mattered to her. I found a small 2-story on a quiet street, mature trees in the backyard, a wide front porch. 1st floor bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, no stairs required. The previous owner had updated the kitchen and the roof was 4 years old. It needed new flooring throughout and the bathrooms were dated, but the bones were good and the price was $218,000. I bought it. I paid cash. I found a contractor I trusted and oversaw the renovation myself. New floors, updated bathrooms, grab bars in the shower designed to look like brushed nickel towel hooks, a lower countertop section in the kitchen that could double as a workspace on days when standing for long periods was hard. I put a small garden bed along the back fence because she had always wanted one. I replaced the front door with one that had a wide frame and a zero-step entry. Then I put the house into a revocable trust with her as the sole beneficiary. I had it reviewed by an estate attorney. I made sure every document was filed correctly with the county. I planned the surprise for the anniversary of her last clean scan. I told her I wanted to take her to brunch, her favorite restaurant, the one with the patio overlooking the river. And then I drove her 20 minutes in the wrong direction before she started looking out the window with the expression she gets when something isn't adding up. When I turned onto the street and she saw the house with the new front door and the flower boxes I'd hung the week before, she went completely quiet. She had her hand over her mouth before I even stopped the car. I helped her out and walked her up the path. I put the key in her hand. She stood in the doorway for a long moment and then she walked in slowly, running her hand along the wall, stopping in the kitchen to look at the herbs I'd transplanted from her apartment windowsill and replanted in a box above the new sink. She didn't say anything for almost 10 minutes. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and started crying. Not distressed crying, the other kind, and said, "I don't know how you did this." And I said, "It doesn't matter, it's yours, your name is in the trust, nobody can change that but you." We spent that first weekend planting the garden bed together. I helped her figure out the new thermostat. She rearranged the living room furniture 3 times before she found a configuration that felt right, and I didn't say a word about it. I drove home Sunday evening feeling something settle inside me that I hadn't even realized was unsettled. I should have known better than to assume it would stay that way. She called me 11 days later. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she is managing 2 things at once and not managing either of them very well. "Your brother is coming to visit next weekend," she said. "He wants to see the house." She paused. "He's bringing Kristen. Kristen is my brother's girlfriend of 3 years. I have met her 4 times. She has opinions about real estate. I had a case review I couldn't reschedule that weekend, so I didn't drive out. I told myself my brother was curious, not calculating. I told myself the legal structure was solid and the paperwork was clean and there was nothing to be concerned about. I was right about the paperwork. I was wrong about everything else." The voicemail came on a Tuesday morning. My mother's voice, careful and controlled in the way it gets when she is trying not to alarm me. "Honey, I think you should come out this week if you can. Your brother left some papers on the table and I'm not sure what I'm looking at. He said it was just information, but I didn't understand it and I didn't want to sign anything before talking to you." She paused. "I'm not trying to make trouble. I just want to understand what I agreed to." I listened to it twice, standing in the hallway outside my office. Then I went back in, moved 3 appointments, and drove out that afternoon. My brother's car was not in the driveway when I arrived, but the papers were on the kitchen table exactly where my mother had said. My mother was in the kitchen making tea. She had that look, the one from the apartment, the one I hadn't seen since before she got the clean scan, like she was carrying more than she should have to. I sat down and read the papers. It was a proposal, formatted like a business document, with section headers and projected figures. My brother had typed it up, or had someone type it up. It laid out a plan to list the house as a vacation rental during peak summer months. 8 weeks, conservative estimate of $30,000 to $35,000 in revenue, with a property management company that would handle bookings and cleaning. There was a revenue split outlined at the bottom, 60% to my mother, 40% to my brother and Kristen, described as a management fee for their time and oversight. My mother's name was on the signature line. I set the papers down and looked at my mother. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "He said it would help me with the bills," she said. "He said I wasn't using it during those months anyway." She looked out the window. He was very confident about it. I already knew what the trust documents said. I had written the language myself and had it reviewed by an estate attorney before filing. The trust gave my mother unconditional right of occupancy and use. It prohibited commercial use of any kind without written authorization from the trustee. And I was the trustee. But I also knew that my mother would have signed that paper if I hadn't come. Not because she wanted to. Because she doesn't know how to say no to people who present her with a plan and a pen and a confident voice. Because she spent 11 years managing a third-floor walk-up after my father left, and she's never in her life assumed that she was allowed to want things without negotiating for them. I was putting the papers back in order when I heard my brother's car in the driveway. He came in through the back door, which I noticed. He'd moved through the side gate without pausing at the front, the way you do when you already think of a place as yours. Kristen came in behind him carrying a tote bag and a measuring tape. I am not exaggerating about the measuring tape. She set it on the counter and then seemed to register me sitting at the table and became very busy looking at her phone. "Hey," my brother said. His voice had the particular warmth it gets when he's deciding how a conversation is going to go. "I didn't know you were coming out." I said I wasn't planning to. I set my hands flat on the table, on top of his proposal. "I read this," I said. He sat down across from me. "Now," he said, "before you react." He held up one hand. "This is actually a smart move for her. She's on a fixed income. This house is an asset that's sitting idle 2 months a year. We're not talking about disrupting her life. We're talking about supplementing it." I slid the proposal to the side and took my folder out of my bag. I have the same habit that I've had since my first year in billing compliance. Every significant matter I'm involved in gets documented as if it's going to litigation, regardless of whether I think it will. I had brought the full file. I placed the first document on the table. The deed, recorded with the county 8 months ago, held in trust with my mother as sole lifetime beneficiary. I read the relevant clause aloud. My brother listened. He nodded slowly, like he was hearing something he'd already considered. "Trust language is flexible," he said. "Trustees have discretion." I placed the second document on the table, a written opinion from my estate attorney dated 6 months ago, confirming that the trust as structured was valid, properly recorded, and that the commercial use prohibition was binding and not subject to reinterpretation by any party other than the trustee. Non-beneficiaries, the letter stated, had no standing to propose modifications to the trust terms. My brother's expression shifted. Kristen had stopped looking at her phone. I placed the third document, a screenshot of a draft rental listing. I had found it that morning, 30 minutes before I left, by searching the property address on 2 major rental platforms. The listing had gone up 3 days earlier. It included interior photographs taken from inside the house. My mother had not taken those photographs. The listing was connected to an account registered to Kristen's email address, which I had found because the platform's public profile was not set to private. I placed the fourth document, a printed copy of the county's short-term rental ordinance, owner-occupant presence required during all rental periods, special use permit required, certificate of inspection required. No permit had been filed for this address because no application had ever been submitted. First violation, $2,500. Subsequent violations up to $8,000 per instance, plus potential revocation of rental eligibility for the property. I had submitted a complaint to the county rental compliance office that morning citing the listing, the unpermitted use, and the misrepresentation of ownership. I noted this aloud. My brother was quiet. The warmth had left his face. I placed the fifth document, a cease and desist addressed to both of them, drafted by my attorney and sent to his email address at 9:14 that morning, formally notifying them that any further attempt to list, photograph for commercial purposes, market, or misrepresent the property would be treated as tortious interference with the trust and would result in legal action. The kitchen was very still. "We're family," my brother said finally. "We are," I said. "Which is why I'm telling you directly instead of letting the county handle it. The listing needs to come down today. The account needs to be closed. Any materials you took from this property, photos, measurements, anything, need to be deleted. And then I need you both to leave because you are guests here and I need to speak with my mother alone." What followed was not graceful. My brother made 2 phone calls in the driveway, voice low and clipped. Kristen came back inside once, said she needed to get the tote bag she'd left on the counter, and left without looking at anyone. My mother stood at the sink washing a single cup that was already clean. Eventually, both car doors shut and they drove away. My mother and I sat at the kitchen table while the afternoon moved through the windows. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He walked through the whole house the first day he came. Every room. He asked about the square footage. He asked about the septic system." She looked down at her mug. I thought he was just proud of it. The way you are when someone you love does something remarkable. She shook her head slightly. I should have called you when he left the papers. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her the structure existed exactly for this reason, so that she didn't have to fight anyone herself, so that she could just say no. It's my house, my daughter set it up that way, call her. I told her she never had to manage anyone's disappointment alone again. She looked at me for a moment and then looked out at the garden bed we planted together and said, "I keep forgetting that I'm allowed to have something that's just mine." The posts appeared on social media 4 days later. My brother first, then Kristen, sharing and adding her own commentary. Nothing named directly, everything implied. Words like controlling and manipulation dressed up in the language of concern. A mutual cousin messaged me asking if everything was okay. 2 of my mother's friends texted her with worried questions. I wrote one response, an email to both of them, copied to my attorney and to my firm's senior compliance director, noting that any verifiable public statements referencing me, my mother, or the property that caused demonstrable harm would be addressed as defamation and as tortious interference with the trust. All future communication was to be directed through my attorney's office. I included my attorney's contact information. I sent it at 7:30 in the morning, so it was the first thing they read. The posts came down within 24 hours. 3 weeks later, my mother called on a Sunday evening. Her voice was steady, almost matter-of-fact. "There was a man on the porch this morning," she said. "He had a folder. Said he had a rental agreement for me to look at. Said it had already been discussed with the family." I asked what she'd done. "I told him I needed to check with my daughter first," she said. "And then I took a photo of his face and his car." She texted me the photos before I could ask. I had installed a property camera system during the final week of renovation, motion activated, feeding to an app with a 30-day cloud archive. I pulled it up on my laptop. The man had arrived at 10:14, stayed on the porch for 6 minutes, and driven away in a white sedan. I matched his face to a photo on the website of the property management company my brother had referenced in his original proposal. I called the county non-emergency line. I texted my brother a still from the camera feed with one sentence. "I have 30 days of footage. The trust is on record with the county and I've already spoken with the sheriff's non-emergency line." His reply came in 4 minutes. "Miscommunication. Won't happen again." The car was gone before the deputy reached the road. That weekend, I drove out with a locksmith. We replaced all the entry hardware with keypad deadbolts and set up a backup code that only my mother and I knew. I walked her through the camera system at the kitchen tablet, how to pull up the live feed, how to share a clip, who to call and in what order if anyone came to the door claiming any kind of authority or paperwork. She practiced it twice. The second time, without prompting, she set the tablet back down on the counter herself and said, "Good." She said it the way people say a word when they finally found permission to mean it. My brother sent an email 6 weeks later. Subject line, "Moving forward." 3 sentences acknowledging that he'd handled things in a way that wasn't right. A request to talk when things had settled. A note that he hoped we could figure out a path forward as a family. I read it once. I moved it to a folder. I haven't replied. What I understand now is something I spent a long time refusing to see clearly. I believed that generosity meant endless availability. That if you set a limit, you were the one who had broken something. That caring for someone meant absorbing whatever came, including the parts that were directed at you like weapons. What I know now is that the limit is not the rupture. The limit is what protects the thing you built from becoming something it was never meant to be. I didn't pay off that debt and buy that house to own anything. I did it because I could see clearly what my mother had earned. 11 years of keeping a family intact on her own. 2 years of chemotherapy and stares and pretending she was fine so other people wouldn't worry. And I wanted to make it real. Permanent, untouchable. A place where she can rearrange the furniture at her own pace and talk to her herbs on the windowsill without managing anyone else's feelings about it. A place that is hers, in the way that nothing has ever been entirely hers before. Last month she planted a second garden bed along the fence. She didn't ask me. She didn't tell me until afterward when she sent me a photo. Soil under her fingernails and the unguarded look of someone who has recently remembered that she is allowed to take up space. I keep that photo in my phone now, right where I can find it. Have you ever built something, really built it, with time and money and the specific quiet kind of love that doesn't need an audience, and then had to stand between it and the people who wanted to convert it into something useful for them? If you have, then you already know. Protecting it isn't the opposite of generosity. Sometimes it's the only way the generosity actually arrives. There's a version of this story where I don't drive out that Tuesday. Where I tell myself the papers are probably nothing. That my brother means well. That I'm being paranoid. I almost lived that version. I had 3 appointments I didn't want to reschedule and a case review that was going to run long. For about 20 minutes after I heard my mother's voicemail, I actually sat at my desk and talked myself into staying. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who took advantage of my mother's situation didn't do it because they were unusually cruel. They did it because they had learned, over years, that my mother would absorb whatever was asked of her, that she would sign things she didn't fully understand because she didn't want to seem difficult, that her discomfort was something she would manage quietly, privately, without asking anyone to help. They knew this because she had shown them, consistently, that there were no consequences for treating her that way. That's not fate. That's not luck, good or bad. That's a pattern, and patterns hold until something interrupts them. What I learned, not from a book, not from anyone who told me, but from 2 years of paying off medical debt in the dark and watching what happened when I finally stopped being quiet about it, is that the people who behave well consistently are almost always the people who prepared for the moment before it arrived. I didn't win that kitchen confrontation because I'm unusually brave or unusually smart. I won it because I had spent months making sure I understood exactly what the trust said, exactly what the county ordinance required, and exactly what my legal options were if someone tested the structure. The preparation wasn't paranoia. It was the only honest response to what I already knew about the situation. And Kristen's measuring tape sitting on my mother's kitchen counter. That image still stays with me because it captures something true about how entitlement actually operates. It doesn't announce itself, it just starts measuring. My brother is not a villain in some simple story. He's someone who looked at a situation where effort had already been spent and resources had already been secured and decided, without apparently much internal friction, that there was room for him to take a share. That calculation wasn't malicious in the dramatic sense. It was just a habit. The habit of reaching for things without asking whether he'd earned them. And that habit had been working for him for a long time, in a lot of contexts, because no one had ever stood at a kitchen table and placed 5 documents in front of him and waited. What I want people to take from this, if they take anything, is not that you should be suspicious of your family, or that generosity is dangerous. It's simpler than that, and harder than that at the same time. It's that the most ethical thing you can do for the people you love is make the structure of your protection so solid that it doesn't depend on their goodwill. You do that by being clear-eyed, by preparing before you need to, by documenting the things that matter, and by understanding that saying this is mine and you may not touch it is not a failure of love. It is, sometimes, the most precise expression of it. My mother sent me a photo last month. Second garden bed, new soil, her hands in the frame. She didn't ask permission to plant it. She just did it and told me after. That's the whole point. That's what I built it for.